Don't you agree when they all say home is where the heart is? But do you see
yeah, don't mind Rocky. He's in the back. That's my puppy. That's my dog. Today I want to talk about my childhood, and I don't mean how I grew up, where I grew up, blah blah blah, because that's a whole nother video. I want to talk about the symptoms and experiences in my childhood that kind of made sense once I was diagnosed and I started to understand my symptoms and the way that I am and the way that I operate, or the way that my mind processes things. So yeah, let's get into it. I was diagnosed with depression when I was probably, I think I was 12 years old, diagnosed with anxiety when I was 19 or 20, and then diagnosed with borderline personality when I was 20. Also PTSD when I was about 19 or 20 as well. Yeah, a lot of these things already existed in my childhood up until high school and into college, and I never really understood why I was the way I was until I kind of got the diagnosis itself and started doing my research and did a little more self-reflecting on who I am, what I did, and why I did it. So yeah, I'll start off with my first panic attack. I do have trauma. Yeah, I'll just say that I've experienced trauma, and this has happened early in childhood. And my first panic attack was when I was about 7 years old. I lived in Temecula, California, and I think I was watching a movie with my mom, and I just remember having this really heavy chest pain. And mind you, I was a kid, so I can barely communicate how I was actually feeling or what I was thinking. And I remember I was sitting there on the couch. I think I was on my mom's lap, actually, and I was staring at this vase, and for some reason I just felt this like gripping pain in my chest, and I didn't know what was going on. And all of a sudden, like, my body went numb, and all I could tell my mom was, like, I can't breathe, like I can't breathe. And I just remember crying. They called the ambulance and stuff like that, but that was a very small, that's my first instance and my first memory of actually having a panic attack and experiencing it. I don't remember what happened after that, but I remember throughout my childhood I would have these weird episodes of the pain in my chest and in my lungs just just tightening up to a point where my joints would lock and my body would go numb, and I had no idea what was going on. There were times where it was triggered by, or my PTSD was triggered, or there were times where it would just happen out of nowhere. And there was this very embarrassing story when I was, two embarrassing stories. I guess I'll talk about the first one. When I was, I believe, 10 years old, I was at Six Flags. And if there's any physical pain in my body regarding gas pain or not being able to breathe, it triggers a panic attack. Like, you know, given you can't breathe and you're going to go into panic. And I was only 10 years old. And I remember, again, they called the ambulance, and my dad, I remember he physically had to carry me and like rub my back so that the gas pains in my stomach would go away. But it wasn't necessarily the gas pains that had them call the ambulance. It was the fact that I said, like, I couldn't breathe and that I was panicking. And I come from a Filipino family, so like, I mean, anything with panic, it's like, oh, just calm down. But I mean, I was a kid. Like, I didn't know how to explain what was going on with me. So every time this would happen, the doctors or whoever came in the ambulance would always say, oh, like, she's fine now. She just needed time to like rest or like calm down. But I was never actually told, like, oh, that was a panic attack. When I was 16, I had an issue again with gas pains. But at this point, I remember I was trying to like relieve the gas pain, but then the hollow feeling in my stomach started to make me make my lungs like tense up. And I remember, like, when that starts happening, I kind of was aware of like when my episode was going to start, when I start getting really lightheaded and I start having trouble breathing. So I remember that I held my stomach and I tried really hard to slow down my breathing, and I closed my eyes and I passed out in the bathroom on the floor. And I remember my older brother holding me and bringing me to the emergency room, telling the people in the hospital at the ER, like, oh, she's not breathing, she's not breathing. And of course that made them panic because they thought like I was dead, but I'm pretty sure my brother was in a panic too, and I was having trouble breathing, and like my body was so tense from not having oxygen that it was stiff, like I was like a rock. And I woke up in the hospital bed, and this was probably the first experience, like the first time someone actually, like a professional, told me like that was a really bad panic attack. And I remember being like, that doesn't even make sense. Like, why would my body react that way if there wasn't actually, like, I don't know, it felt like it wasn't actually like an issue. I always thought, okay, well, if I'm like freaking out, I can just calm down. But I remember they were like, oh yeah, like it was just a panic attack, blah blah blah. And in my head I was like, well, like I felt like I was dying, and now you're telling me it was just a panic attack, and that all I should do is grab a paper bag and breathe into it and I'll be fine. Which, if you do deal with really bad panic attacks, you know that doesn't do anything. Yeah, so that was my experience looking back at my panic attacks, and just never really understanding why my body would react that way in really weird situations. Like sometimes it would just be out of nowhere. So that was that also kind of led to a psychiatrist telling me I had panic disorder when I was 22. I believe I was told I had panic disorder, but I mean, like, it's just everything I experience is an umbrella of a lot of different things. I also kind of wanted to talk all about my depressive disorder, my depression, my depressive symptoms when I was a kid. As a kid, I was pretty happy, very ambitious. I wanted to be a lot of things, and that would change here and there. I can't even say here and there. It would change all the time. But I'll touch on my depressive episodes. Most of them, it got pretty bad in middle school. Yeah, so when I was 12 years old, in health class in 8th grade, we were kind of learning about, you know, abuse and just like a lot of childhood trauma that I kind of linked to myself personally. And then, you know, in adolescence, this is kind of when you're like, oh, who am I in the world? Like, what place do I want to take? But yeah, so when I was learning about these things and learning more about myself and what I experienced as a kid, I started to self-harm. I think that I wanted to find a way to cope with the feelings that I was feeling without actually having to tell anyone, and without actually having to like confront myself. Like, it was kind of just like, okay, well, if I could feel something, then I can feel it, and like that's that. And yeah, the self-harming started when I was about 11 or 12 years old, and then stopped in high school. But when it stopped in high school, it turned into different things. It turned into not showering, it turned into not eating, it turned into oversleeping. And that's kind of the way that I learned to process my own depression, was to catch when I started to think, okay, well, if I'm not cutting myself, then I'm not going to eat. If I'm not going to eat, then I'm not going to shower. If I'm not going to shower, then I'm going to isolate myself and I'm going to sleep all day. And that was probably the most unhealthy thing that my depression manifested itself into, because I still struggle with these kinds of things. This is what I'm saying, like, this was an illness I didn't know actually existed up until my early adulthood, late teen years. That pattern that I would fall into once I was depressed, or once I fell into an episode, followed me to college. And it's still a work in progress, but I remember looking back and being like, hey, I'm really sorry for a lot of the things that I did in high school, or the way that like, I'm sorry I treated myself the way I did when I was in high school, is because I didn't know. I did go in and out of counseling and therapy since I was about 11 years old, since I did start self-harming and my parents started putting me into treatment. I'm not perfect, and I was experiencing a lot of emotions that I didn't know how to cope with in a healthy way. But whatever I wanted to do, I just did, and I think that was just my way of trying to feel better or cope with whatever confusing thoughts or emotions that I really had. Thanks guys for watching this video, and please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.
Can't wait till I get back to the bay, back to the common sense.